Good evening, and thank you for joining us for our Wednesday night Bible study. If you are following along, we are going to begin with chapter 4 this evening, and I want to go ahead and remind everyone that we'll be transitioning back into our traditional setting, going to Wednesday night Bible studies at the building. Now, we will begin in our book on chapter 5, which will start with Solomon building the temple. Chapter 4 ends a section. If you remember, we started with chapters 1 a few weeks ago, and we saw how David was getting old and Solomon was getting ready to take the throne, and yet his brother Adonijah has attempted to steal the throne, to usurp it from David. And David would go through the process of making an elaborate ceremony to show Israel that his chosen successor was Solomon. And he would go so far as to bow down on his bed before Solomon, acknowledging that he was the king. Chapter 2 shows us that David he's bitter. And it gives us a really dark start to the beginning of Solomon's reign. David on his deathbed, he tells Solomon, hey, follow God, do what's right, do all these things, walk after God as I've walked after God. And, it reminds you of Moses, but then he transitions into, oh, by the way, kill my political adversaries. Take care of this individual, take care of that individual. So it's a pretty dark start. Chapter 3, wisdom. It is the highlight of Solomon's life. He turns to God. He says, I'm but a child. Please help me. God has appeared to him in a dream at this point, and we see that God says, because you asked for this, because you asked for help and wisdom, I'll grant it to you, but also I will grant you riches. I will grant you fame. No one will be like you all the days of your life. That's where we start with chapter 4. Chapter 4 is going to end this precursor to, looking at the actual events of Solomon's life. And it's going to tell us, here is how the kingdom is ran. Here's who is going to help Solomon. And here is what Solomon has amassed. Here is the overview of the wealth that Solomon has. And it really shows us both God's influence, without a lack of a better word. God has stepped in and really blessed Solomon beyond any measure that you could actually, accurately make. But it also shows how Solomon uses those blessings and some of the problems we're going to find with the way Solomon utilizes what God has blessed him with. So let's go ahead and begin. We'll start reading in chapter 4, verse 1. Now, you're lucky we're ending with this chapter. Had we any other opportunity, I would be glad to say, hey, you know what? I'll let y'all read these verses, and you can go through them without me. This is a bunch of names, and if you have ever heard me try to pronounce names, you'll know that it is a sad event. But we'll get through them the best as we can, and Lord willing, it won't be too bad. Chapter 4, verse 1. So King Solomon was king over all Israel, and these were his officials: Azariah, the son of Zadok the priest, Elihoreph, and Hajjah, the son of Shisha, scribes, Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahulad, the recorder, Benaniah, the son of Jehoiada, over the army, Zadok and Abiathar, the priest, Azariah, the son of Nathan, over the officers, Zabub, the son of Nathan, a priest and the king's friend, Ahasar, over the household, and Adoniram, the son of Abda, over the labor force. Now we're going to take a moment to stop right here, and I want to discuss these individuals, because what we find is this is the individuals, these are the men behind the throne. And think about it. The president of the United States, he has his cabinet. He has his advisors. He has those who help him maintain the nation. The same is true for, any ruler that you see in history. This is basically those that are going to take over the day-to-day task for the king in a lot of areas. You have the man that watches over, the household. Basically, he makes sure the household runs smoothly. You have the individual that's over the army, the individual that's over the priesthood, the individual that's, responsible for the scribes. That all these individuals, all these people that serve to maintain and make sure that everything runs smoothly in the kingdom. And they answer obviously to Solomon. But Solomon is put in charge of a nation that, as he himself acknowledges to God, he is but a child. And we see that one aspect of his wisdom is that he picks men that he believes can best help him run that nation. Now, verse 7 is going to show us that the kingdom is going to be divided into sections. And it's 12 groups. This is very symbolic in the Bible, 12 tribes of Israel. Just the concept of 12 is something we see throughout the Bible. But Israel is divided into 12 sections, and Solomon is going to place someone over these groups to ensure that they are capable of maintaining the kingdom. Now, this is something that is common throughout history, especially in this region. Just think about Rome. During the time of Christ, Pontius Pilate was in charge of Jerusalem and the surrounding area. During the time of Paul, we know we had Herod, the king of Jerusalem, who answered to Rome. We see that there are individuals who are in charge of sections, but they answer to a governing authority. This is what's happening here. These people are basically the governors, on our term would be a governor, the governor of a state. So that's what we have here is that idea. Verse 7, and Solomon had 12 governors over all of Israel who provided food for the king and his household. Each one made provision for 1 month of the year. Now, I want to take a moment to go ahead and tell you that the household is not just the children and the wives, in Solomon's case, of Solomon. Instead, they're going to be anyone that worked with the king, anyone that served his house, anyone that was visiting dignitary. All of these individuals would have sat at the king's table, and these governors were responsible for providing for the food. We're going to see later on at and when we get to the riches of Solomon, that they provided a massive amount of food, but they also provided the means for the animals that tended or that served the king as well. So this is, a very large number of people that have to be maintained and taken care of. And the providences, if you will, these governed sections of Israel, each take 1 month to do it. So they, let's say we're looking at, Arkansas. Arkansas might have to feed the White House for, 1 month, and then Texas the next month, and Louisiana the following month. That type of mentality as it goes through. You get through all 12 sections of Israel taking care of the king. Verse 8. These are the names: Ben-Hur in the mountains of Ephraim, Ben-Decker in Makaz, Salibim, Beth Shemesh, and Elo Beth Hanan. Ben-Hesed in Araboth, to him belonged Sokah and all the land of Hepher. Abinadab in all the regions of Dor, he had Tapha, the daughter of Solomon, his wife. Bana, the son of Ahulad, in Tanakh. Medigo and all Beth Shean, which is beside Zartan, below Zezreel, from Beth Shean to Abel Mahalo, as far as the other side of Jokneam. Ben Gerber in Ramoth Gilead, to him belonged the towns of Jair, the son of Manasseh. In Gilead, to him also belonged the region of Argob in Bashan, 60 large cities with walls and bronze gate bars. Ahinadab, the son of Iddo in Mahanaim, Hamaz in Naphtali. He also took Basemath, the daughter of Solomon, his wife. Banah, the son of Hushai in Asher and Elath. Jehoshaphat, the son of Parah in Issachar, Shimei the son of Elah in Benjamin, Gerber the son of Uri in the land of Gilead, in the country of Sihon king of the Amorites, and of Og king of Bashan. He was the only governor who was in that land. So we have these 12 individuals. We see that they are divided up into the groups. We also see that the Bible lets us know some of these individuals are married to Solomon's daughters. So basically, the Bible's telling us that these are important people. The King Solomon typically made alliance marriages for himself, and it stands to reason that he would do the same for his children, that they would, be used to further his kingdom. So when we see, that a daughter of Solomon is married to someone, that is strengthening the kingdom, strengthening the bonds between Solomon and these individuals. Now, these are important individuals. We're going to see some of them later on as the book unfolds. They serve the purpose of providing for Solomon, but also of governing these sections. Now, starting in verse 20, the text is going to shift. We're no longer going to be talking about these individuals so much, but we're going to look at how God has blessed Solomon and what he does with that blessing. Verse 20 says, Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand by the sea in multitude, eating and drinking and rejoicing. So Solomon reigned over all the kingdoms from the river to the land of the Philistines, as far as the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. Now Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores of fine flour. Now a core is 5 bushels, 60 cores of meal, 10 fatted oxen, 20 oxen from the pastures, and 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelle, roebuck, and fatted fowl. For he had dominion over all the region of this side of the river of Tifsha, even to Gaza, namely over all the kings of this side of the river, and he had peace on every side of all around him. Then Judah and Israel dwelt safely, each man under his vine and his fig tree, from Dan as far as Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. Now I want to stop right there. We'll pick back up in a minute, but what we've seen here is that the Israelites dwelt under, it tells us the vine and the fig tree. These are symbols of prosperity. In our Sunday night class, we talked about the reality that the fig was the most versatile and most prosperous plant of this region. It produces fruit 10 months out of a year, meaning that basically if you have a fig tree, you have a steady and plentiful source of food. And it also was a status symbol. Obviously the vine as well, that's your grapes. That's where they would get their grape juice. That's where they would get their, the wine that they had. All of this was symbolic and used to show that they were a very prosperous and wealthy people. And that goes back to verse 20 where it says they were eating and drinking and rejoicing. These people were living in basically a golden age. Now, we understand if you get to the middle, I think it's 12 or 13 that we see, the death of Solomon. When you get to that section, we see there's some costs associated with this, that yes, they eat, they drink, they're merry. But Solomon, when he starts building everything, he's going to start taxing the people to extreme limits. So understand that all of this comes at a cost in terms of what's going to be put on the people. They're still rejoicing. They're still having a great time. This is, again, a golden age for Israel. But it shows us that Solomon's power is without equal. Take note, one thing that's really important is that the kingdom extends beyond the traditional borders of Israel that we consider. The kings of other regions have to pay tribute to Solomon. Basically, they're puppet kings. Solomon allows them to keep their kingdoms, he allows them to keep their reigns, but they pay tribute to him. They acknowledge that he is truly the one in charge, which makes Israel basically a world power at this point. Starting in verse 26, we read, Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses, far as chariots, and 20,000 horsemen. And these governors, each man in his month, provided food for King Solomon and for all who came to King Solomon's table. There was no lack in their supply. They also brought barley and straw to the proper place for the horses and steeds, each man according to his charge. Now, I want us to consider something for a moment here. Everything so far has been pretty, reasonable. The wealth, power, peace. This is exactly what you want your kingdom to have. This is exactly what you want. If you are living in a kingdom, this is what you want to be experiencing. But then we get to verse 26 and we see that some of that is causing problems. Because in Deuteronomy 17, verse 16, if we go back and we read it, we see Moses speaking concerning what a king should and shouldn't do. He says, "But he shall not multiply horses for himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses. For the Lord has said to you, you shall not return that way again." So basically what we see is that God did not want them relying on the military might of the horse. And we have horses and we have chariots. We have exactly what God is telling them don't do. Add to that the reality that we have 40,000. That is a massive number of animals, and we see that the governors are taking care of these, that they are providing the necessities for these animals to survive. Now, one thing I want to take note to consider, though, is you look at verse 27, and it says that they provided all this stuff, yes, but there was no lack in their supply. Israel is so prosperous at this point that despite the fact that he is providing so much, he's providing food for 12,000 horsemen. He's providing food for the whole household of Solomon. They're not lacking. They're never struggling to meet the demand. Okay, let's continue on. We'll read the rest of the chapter, and then we will call it an evening. Verse 29 says, "And God gave Solomon wisdom and exceedingly great understanding, and largeness of heart like the sand on the seashore. Thus Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the men of the east, and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol, and his fame was in all the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. Also, he spoke of trees, for the cedar of Lebanon, even to the hibiscus, the sprigs out of the wall. He spoke also of animals, of birds, of creeping things, and fish, and of all nations. And men of all nations, from all the kings of the earth, who had heard of his wisdom, came to hear the wisdom of Solomon." Basically, the last little section here is God recording for us just how popular, in some aspects, Solomon comes, but also the wisdom that he had. We look at artists. People appreciate the artist. They provide for us things that express our inner thoughts. They give us an outlet for our creativity. But can you name anyone that wrote 1,000 songs? And I can't think of anyone. Some of our greatest artists, such as Beethoven or Mozart, or you go into outside of that, looking at Shakespeare, who wrote so many things. They never came close to writing what would be the equivalent of 1,000 songs, and these are more than likely the Psalms as well. So these weren't just here, let me sing you a little song. That some of these are heartfelt and emotional poetry, being what the idea here as well. So not only did he do that, he wrote 3,000 proverbs. Now, we have the book of Proverbs. We will study that eventually, I'm sure. But understand that these proverbs are universal truths. They're points in which we can look into our lives and get benefit from them. So we are benefiting from the wisdom of Solomon even today. And that is something that I think we need to acknowledge and accept, that God's blessing of Solomon is still blessing us even today. The book ends after mentioning the reality that Solomon's, his wisdom isn't limited to the things of mankind, but, he has knowledge of trees and animals and, nature itself. I think that's just an interesting side point the Bible makes for us, showing us that his wisdom is truly all-encompassing. But it ends with the note that all men and all the kings, if they hear of his wisdom, they want to come and hear it. I want us to end with this thought. Solomon's wisdom was such that people, when they learned about it, they wanted to come, they wanted to experience what he had to say. Now, understand that this is, a Wednesday night Bible class, that we are, just studying the Bible, but I think we'd be remiss not to acknowledge that we have an individual who is far wiser than Solomon. We have the words of Christ. And if Solomon garnered that much attention, how much more should we desire to open up our Bibles and to study what Jesus says, to look at the words that he provides, and to see just what we can learn from them? I appreciate the time that you spent studying with me. I hope that you understand that, these things are meant to build us up. Now, we will be back at the building next week. We'll begin with chapter 5. Let me go ahead and grab my book real quick. If you were following along in the book and answering the questions as we go, chapter 5 will be on page 58. So let's be sure to start in chapter 5. We'll go through a few chapters, I'm sure, because we'll be back in our book. But page 58 in our books. I'll see y'all next week.